I'm going to talk about precision AI, and in our interpretation at Nevermind, it's all about the data. So this is me. I'm the CEO. I co-founded a project called Ocean Protocol. Actually, it was on one of Rob's slides at the bottom as a data provider to DeSci. So I co-founded that back in 2017, and we launched the first version of it in 2019. And then I went on and I started a company called Kiko, and we built a bunch of networks, helped build Filecoin, built Cello. If anybody knows Filecoin, we built Phil Plus, which is their notary service. It's the most popular application in the Filecoin ecosystem. So yeah, little claim to fame. And then last year, we incubated Nevermind at Kiko, and we spun it out the beginning of last year. So we spent about a year really working on it in earnest. From a DeSci point of view, Nevermind was the technology that was used to launch the first IP NFT, which was done by VitaDAO. So basically the way that it worked, and I'll get into it in a little bit of detail, but Nevermind enables token gating to assets. Can be any kind of asset, and it also allows for the computation to take place on those assets. We're less of, pitch this as an AI talk. We're less of an AI company and more of a data company, but data for machine learning, federated learning, and artificial intelligence. We're also working with HairDAO and with DeSciWorld. So we've been in the space since kind of the beginning. But I think, who here hasn't tried ChatGPT? Okay, one person, good. I mean, broadly speaking, I think everybody's has seen this explosion in AI over the last 12 months or so. There's a few things that AIs really need to work. They need computation power, they need expertise, and they need shit piles of data. Especially the new transformer models and neural networks. They just need, the more data you throw at them, the more accurate they are. However, so I've spent, I'm going to date myself here, but almost 25 years in the data and analytics space. And cut my teeth on like the emergence of big data and machine learning as it relates to big data. And one of the things we saw when I started, if you were doing a very application or analytics heavy application 20 years ago, what you probably used was an appliance. It was like a bespoke, fit for purpose machine that would do like microtransactions for trading purposes or something along those lines. And you would buy it from basically one of three vendors, IBM, Oracle, or SAP, and you'd pay like 10 million bucks a year for one application. So it wasn't really readily available. And then Google released a paper called MapReduce, which basically enabled a concept called multi-parallel processing, which basically divided up the processing from a single unit of computation across multiple units, and you could do it without specialized hardware, commodity servers. So this drastically reduced the cost of computation and led to the big data and then the machine learning revolution that came along with it. And that's why we're here today. But as part of that, right now, we're kind of looking at this world where compute is a bottleneck because it's so expensive for these GPUs. So if you want to create a large language model or a big diffusion model, it takes a lot of computation power, costs a lot of money. OpenAI didn't release the numbers, but they anticipated the cost for training GPT-4 was somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 million. So most companies just can't afford that, right? But if we follow the same sort of pattern, there will probably be software implementations that help improve this cycle, as well as hardware and will drive down the cost of compute. Related to this is expertise. So when we started out, and today with AI, the expertise is quite high. The cost of the expertise is quite high. But because it's so popular, there's more people entering the field, it's going to drive down the cost. Now, on the data side, data is a bit interesting. You create these bigger assets. So the unit cost of these data sets, it goes down. But the complexity, cost of integration, maintenance, et cetera, it stays really high. It can plateau or in some cases even increase. So the way we look at things is, from our point of view, in the long run, we think that data and access to data will be the biggest rate limiter to the development and advancement of artificial intelligence. Okay, this is just sort of a super condensed crash course in what we're talking about when we talk about AI. So right now we're really talking about LLMs and diffusion models. You're leaving? Was it something I said? She doesn't like my talk. Oh well. So LLMs, it's prompt to text based modeling. So you're given a prompt. She came back, thank God. Put in a prompt, get a text response. They're massive, hundreds of billions of parameters. They tend to be general purpose knowledge bases. They work on this principle of next best word outcomes. This is what the transformer model represents, like GPT-3, 4, etc. On the other side, on the generative art side, you've got diffusion models like Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, etc. Also massive in size. These work by putting in a prompt and getting an image out, or images. The best examples, again, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, DALL-E 2. So there's a couple things to address with these models. One is they're kind of dumb. They're big knowledge bases, but first off, they're frozen in time. So because they require so much computational capacity, you have to basically do batch processing, which means you can only include data up to a certain point in time. Also, they have questionable factual recall. So without plugins like Wolfram Alpha or something like that, GPT-4 and especially GPT-3 probably won't give you the right answer to a very precise question. Like if you ask the distance between Belgrade and Lisbon, GPT-3 probably won't give you the right answer. And then the other consideration is that there's a lot of prompt engineering overhead. So this is the concept of understanding how the latent space of the model is structured and how you can extract information from that model. The other major concern that doesn't necessarily relate specifically to the design and function of the model is they weren't built for attribution. So the way that these models were trained, companies and organizations like Lion, Common Crawl, and Scale AI went out and scraped publicly available data from the internet, regardless of the copyright associated with those assets, and use those in the training sets of these large models. What they don't do on an output or on an inference, they don't provide any reference to where that response was sourced from. In the case of diffusion models, you have companies like Stability AI being accused by other companies like Getty for straight up IP theft and copyright infringement. So there's clearly a problem here from a commercial point of view. So yeah, if we look at this overall, these LLMs are broad, general knowledge, general purpose algorithms. What you can do is you can work with these general knowledge bases, and if you provide more specific, concise data sets, you can effectively generate more precise responses or inferences. And so this is, in particular, what we focus on at Nevermind. It's the enablement of this type of processing. One of the patterns is called transfer learning. So this is the concept of building a model for a specific purpose. And we learned this quite a while ago with just regular run-of-the-mill machine learning, that you could build a model for, say, credit card fraud detection, and then you could use that model for an adjacent use case, say fraud detection in corporate email, if you provide a new set of data, which is the context for fraud detection in email. So if you start feeding in emails, basically, to this model that was purpose-built for credit card fraud, you can actually start to generate decent inferences on fraudulent activity that's taking place inside your company. And this process of using one model for an adjacent application is called transfer learning. So what do you get out of it? You get better accuracy on the inferences, and an interesting point is that you also have known context. So you know what you're putting in and leveraging with this model. So as we can see, these two components are intertwined. The AI needs relevant data to create valuable input, and the data needs AIs to become valuable. However, there's a few issues at hand. One is lack of access. So we've had a long-held belief internally, and this is informed by our experience in the ML space, that the more data you throw at something, the more accurate it's going to be, but the trajectory is that, hey, we're going to run out of data at some point. There was a report to back up this concept or idea, a research paper from some people at MIT last year in October. Basically, the predictions in that research paper are as early as this year, but more likely 2025. We're actually going to run out of high-quality text-based information that can be scraped from the internet to train these LLMs. With images for computer vision applications and diffusion, it looks like 2035 to 2070. But writing's on the wall, we're going to run out of information at some point that's publicly available. So what do? We're going to have to go after private data sets. AIs have a reputational problem. Again, there's this issue of not knowing where the response is actually coming from. Is there bias baked into the response? And there's no attribution, right? So how do I know if this AI isn't ripping me off, either as an artist or as an individual, right? You just don't know until you discover it yourself. And then the last thing that's sort of an issue in the current state of things is there's a real lack of monetization opportunities. So if you take the platform or as a service providers like Stable Diffusion or OpenAI, et cetera, they're capturing the value, but those that are building on top have limited facilities for actually generating revenue. So can we address this situation? And the answer is yes, you can. So this is what we're working on. From a catchphrase point of view, we're transforming walled data into AI gold mines. So what do we do? What do we make available to do this? There's an asset registry. So you can register the existence of data sets or models or associated services. You can control the access. You can set the boundaries for that access. You can limit access by time or by number of requests. And you can also limit it by charging for said access. And that relates to the potential for monetization. We do that through a concept called subscription NFTs. I'll get into that in a second. But in addition to that, by leveraging the technology that we're using, blockchain, you can also establish the provenance of these assets. Where were they sourced from? How were they used? By which models? And based on the inference, also include references back to that source material, which means you can start to implement and enforce royalties or residuals or upfront payment. So we've established if you combine AI and blockchain, you're going to have great things. So you get better provenential integrity. You can have this potential for proof of reference. And then from all of this, transparency and fine-grained provenance, you can actually apply proper attribution, which leads to hopefully proper payment. So if we have established that AIs need Web3, the issue now we need to overcome is the fact that Web3 UX sucks. So how do we do that? Okay, now I'm going to kind of hopefully I'll expand on a general Web3 experience, but if you were to think about a marketplace, let's call it a DeFi data marketplace. We've built a lot of marketplaces in the last little while. So the people, myself and my company, we've got a lot of, this is based on a lot of experience. Let's say you've got a DeFi data marketplace that was set up for the purposes of making specific data sets from a number of different DeFi protocols, their data sets available to quants for backtesting purposes. So this is where you train an algorithm based on your ideas of strategy, and you create your strats for trading, right? Most of the time, the data for these sources will be bucketed by time, usually in like 1 month segments. So if I'm a quant and I want to pull 12 months worth of data from 5 different DeFi protocols, and these assets are in any way, shape, or form token gated, that's at least 60 confirms in MetaMask to get access to these assets. Probably more if there's any transfer of value, like if I have to pay for them. We're probably looking at a few hundred confirms. So I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to sit around for an hour just trying to gain access to the data sets. So we went back to the drawing board and said, okay, this being the case, how do we make this stuff available, knowing that these assets individually aren't super valuable, but in an aggregate, they are. So we came up with the concept of a subscription NFT. And that's where we create or enable the creation of an NFT by a publisher, say one of these 5 DeFi protocols. They can break up their data into chunks, and you can bucket it into subscriptions where you set the time or the number of requests that can be made against these assets. Maybe you set a fee for it, but you can token gate the access, and then what you do is append different assets to that single NFT. So now, in order to gain access to these 60-odd data sets, you just buy 1 token, and you get access to the whole shebang. UX problem solved. So, what's the benefit? 1 token to rule them all. So you have a situation where you have 1 asset that can help manage and organize many assets. You can apply token gating, so you basically have assets under NFT instead of assets under management. And this proves to be really powerful when it comes to service workflows. So when you start to combine algorithms with the data sets that they need, you can create these subscriptions for that entire service. You also get simplicity and flexibility. So it's a simpler process to sell more assets. You can start to create tiering and token gating on token gating, so the classic Patreon or OnlyFans model. Now you can enable it with crypto. And then there's this emergent case of liquid licensing, where with traditional subscriptions, they were locked to you, right? You go to a gym, you get a membership, you don't want to use the gym anymore. Hey, good luck getting rid of the membership. Now, maybe you can sell it. So it becomes a more liquid asset. We've put all this together in the Nevermind app. I'm going to rip through this. Actually, maybe I'll explain it very quickly. So if we take AI data and the subscription NFTs, in the concept of, let's say, ChatGPT and the plugins, and maybe you've got AutoGPT in the mix, so you can orchestrate an entire AI service workflow. So, Josh, let's say you have the plugins for ChatGPT. You want to create a holiday maker experience for yourself. So, young guy, you want to go put someplace warm, party it up, hit all the nice restaurants. You've got your own specific set of content. You've got your subscription to OpenAI, gives you ChatGPT 4. You've got all the plugins, so you can plug into Expedia, you can plug into TripAdvisor, OpenTable, Google Search, etc. You give it your context, it goes out, boom, here's your holiday for the price you set. And then you and I are talking about this, and I say, Josh, I want that. But I have a different set of context. I got 2 little kids. We want to go skiing. We got to be at the restaurant by 6 p.m. every night eating spaghetti, or my kids lose their minds. A different set of context. If I wanted to use the service that you created, the only way for me to do that right now would be for you to give me your username and login so that I could go to the specific chat window and plug in my context and get that outcome. Instead, you can wrap that service, expose it via an API endpoint, wrap it in an NFT. Now you can give me access to that NFT based on maybe a price I pay. You get your 20 bucks back. Or maybe it's free, but it's time limited to a couple days, whatever it is. Now what we have is that service wrapped in an NFT that provides the means for that AI agent to actually start to compute. And interestingly enough, that also applies to the third-party plugins. So we see this already happening. Stack Overflow, Reddit, etc. They've turned off their APIs. Why? Because of OpenAI and GPT-4 and these other models. Their data's getting hijacked, and their response is to turn it off. How are the AIs going to compute or access these assets? It's going to be difficult. AIs aren't going to have bank accounts. So, I think everybody here is probably biased. What are they going to have? Wallets on chain. And this is how they're going to transact. So, maybe I'll do the demo. And first, let's see. Haha. All right. So, we created a service, in particular for DeSciWorld and their endeavors, that basically takes this gobbledygook and give me 2 seconds, creates this output. So it's a consolidated or summarized version of the 10 pages of research with all the relevant information about the molecules that were in that research paper, the methods that were used to study them, in a more condensed format. Now, why did we do this? I think one of the big feedbacks from ETH Denver in particular was that there's a huge gap between Web3 and the scientific community just on the language that we speak. Each community has its own jargon, and it's very complicated. So there's a lot of information asymmetry. This is an attempt to bridge some of that gap. So now, for instance, this research actually applies to hair loss. So for the HairDAO community and their community of citizen scientists, this hopefully represents a more consumable means of creating that content. What's also important to register here is that in our belief, the act of creating this summary is actually an act of curation and should be rewarded. So if an individual were to drop a research report into a Discord channel in a DAO and create this summary, they could potentially be properly attributed for that act. And then let's say this is such a valuable document, somebody wants to pay for it, they could receive some sort of payment in return. Or they could be rewarded straight up by Etika, for instance. So now we'll go to the app. What we have here is the ability to create subscriptions or plans and then register those assets against them. We're putting together a bit of a marketplace for these data sets and applications. The services, I'll walk you through it very quickly, but I'm going to create a subscription. So let's say I'm going to load a cover image. So this kind of relates to, Rob, what you were saying, like creating something attractive that people are going to, that'll bring attention to what, oh, I guess I was doing Batman before. I think I'm going to have to change it. I'll do Batman. So this is going to be a subscription. I'll add some tags in here. All right, and here we have some options. So you can have a free plan. This would be for, publishers that want to maybe airdrop tokens to their community, and this would be a means of engagement. Or you can select these preset periods, month or 1 year, or you can create a custom plan. I'll create a year. Let's see. Set the price, $10. So the way we work, we take a 1% fee, not on the minting of this, but if somebody purchases this subscription, then we take 1% off that $10. Highlight that here. So you'll make, as a publisher, you'll make $9.90 from that $10 sale. Now we publish it. Now, I've logged in. This is my MetaMask. This contract is being created on, in this case, Polygon Testnet Mumbai. But the actual subscription, I own it. Nevermind doesn't own it. So me as the publisher, it's my asset. Great UX. Round of applause? No? Okay, so most of the magic has happened there. All right, now we have a dashboard. This is isn't the latest version, so aesthetically it's not as beautiful as it will be when we launch on the 15th of June. But you can start to see these plans that I've created, and some of them already have assets attached to them. So for instance, this one, I created an asset. I can actually migrate over to it. I can start to see some of the history about said asset. I can see some of the details. I can look at the terms and conditions for this asset. Yeah. But yeah, so the intention here is to start to create this two-sided marketplace of service providers and data providers. The service that I showed you that did this to this can be published to this ecosystem or this marketplace. So if I go to the marketplace, I can start to see, in particular, some of these services. Let me filter. Asset type, service, search. So we have, in particular, a DeSciWorld AI assistant. So now returning to our Discord. If I go in here, if I query what is HairDAO, I get this response from that exact bot, that AI. I could show you the purchase flow, but it's broken right now, so sorry, can't show it to you. But what's interesting here is because we've done this, we've implemented this pattern of transfer learning, and we've isolated the context of the assets that are going in. There's about 500 DeSci assets, data sets, or documents that we have right now that we're sourcing from. And then we have an LLM behind the scenes. When you ask it the question, it deconstructs the question and then tries to find the best response out of that set of 500. In this case, it found the response from DeSci, or from the DeSci set of collateral to this response. And we're tracking and tracing the provenance of the whole thing. So if I click on that link, this is the source. So if somebody has published this and it's linked to their wallet, then it's okay. I like the tunes. It's a good soundtrack. We should have had it for the whole thing. Yeah. Now, the wallet that published this, if I were to consume it, and you monetized the consumption of this, now when I've monetized it, whoever published it could actually be rewarded. It's, I think, going to be an interesting means of engagement for these DAO communities that are starting to spring up. Rob, I think it'd be very interesting to talk to you on the stuff that you're doing, because we definitely don't want to do it all. So, yeah, anyway. Thank you, everybody. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
I have loads of questions. First one, the subscription NFT, is it its own unique standard of ERC? Have you published it as a...
No, it can be a 721, a 725, or an 1155.
Okay. Have you looked into the subscription NFT EIPs that have been going through?
Yeah.
It's not relevant?
I mean, it could be, but it's not there yet, so we built it.
For the liquidity, the transferability of the subscription NFT, I get, from a regulatory perspective and the mess of the U.S., I always wonder how far something will be stretched to be deemed a security. Just curious in terms of what you all have built, if you have geo-blocked or thought
That's a
about
good
that.
question, especially like less U.S.-based and more European with Mika coming out. I don't have an answer to that yet, because Mika in particular is still pretty nebulous. So for everybody that's here, Mika is legislation that's supposed to come into play next year in Europe, that's going to regulate cryptocurrencies, and specifically those that are deemed securities. Now, NFTs apparently fall outside the coverage of Mika, but if you read Mika, there are certain attributes that will be under oversight that look a hell of a lot like NFTs. So either there's going to need to be additional clarity on that from a reg or legal point of view, or we're just going to have to find a new jurisdiction. But we are facilitating it. Now it becomes a question of the kind of the contemporary analog that I would use is GDPR. I need to read and understand Mika a bit more, but what I'd like to understand is there an analog to data processor versus data controller? Those are two definitions in GDPR, if there's an analog in Mika. If there is, then conceivably we would be deemed more a data processor, an ephemeral component, and not in control of the asset, which would mean we don't need to conform, but we'll see. We're also Swiss-based, so hopefully they'll provide us some protection, but won't bank on that.
Was that a pun?
It was.
This is sort of the idea of this is so that anybody can kind of access the models themselves, the services themselves. But you've chosen Mumbai testnet.
Yep.
Does the blockchain have any inherent limitation on how I can access that? If I'm a traditionally Avalanche user, for example.
Yeah, so we're EVM compatible.
Yeah.
So any EVM-based network will be on Ethereum. At launch, will be on Polygon and Gnosis chain. Gnosis makes a lot of sense because if you think about these assets as assets under management or assets under NFT, those would be assets that would potentially be placed in the custodianship of a DAO, and then you want to have multi-party control via multi-sig. So, but yeah, we don't support Avalanche or I don't think we'll ever support Solana. That's more a personal thing, but this is being recorded.
Look into the camera.
Yeah.
So you're multi-chain, but are you cross-chain? So if we mint this on Mumbai or on any Polygon net, can I then utilize it on other nets?
So the currencies are not, but the front end is. So we could aggregate assets across chains, but the actual purchase of them, let's say you're a publisher and you want to make these assets available in one token. If that's like your own token, like Etika, if Etika is on Polygon but it's not on Gnosis, we can't support the transaction across those chains, and we're not going to bridge. But from an interface point of view, you could still see those assets.
So this is like really, really incredible, and I'm kind of following more now from this presentation than I ever have from the multiple presentations you've given. But what aspects of blockchain interaction does the average user that wants to utilize one of these services has to go through? So they have to go through the rental process, and that's the only thing?
Yeah, that's it. So, and we want to get rid of that too.
Okay.
So we would go kind of in line with what Rob's talking about. So either account abstraction and doing that through like Gnosis Safe, or alternatively custodianship. And if we do either one of those, we can support fiat. What we still need though is the blockchain component on the back end in order to trace and track the assets from point of publishing to point of inference so that we know everything that's going on in the system.
Do you see DeSci as your biggest sort of proponents of using this? In particular, the research things that you just use, the summarizations of the papers.
I mean, the nice part about DeSci in particular, I mean, DeFi's also relevant, but there's a hell of a lot more noise. So this is a smaller community, easier to communicate with, the decision makers to drive adoption. But also historically, research has been, in particular, an ML-driven pursuit, and will probably begin to adopt AI. And then you throw in the Web3 side of things. It's just an easy place to have this conversation. The nice part about the emergence of AI in the last year, it's also made the conversation easier with non-Web3 organizations because they see the problems that I identified, and they're like, we don't know how to solve it. And then I say, well, this is how you do it.